Special guest. I'm going to get off my soapbox. You're in the War Room, live on Capitol Hill, on John Fredericks, Real America's Voice, and Newsmax, G News, GTV. Let's play Tim Pool. I want to play Tim Pool, the very well-known liberal progressive. I want to play a little Tim Pool to introduce our next guest.
But I believe, based on the data that Matt Braynard has collected, we absolutely need now some kind of independent audit or verification in these states. This is serious stuff. The important thing to realize, I believe these are all Republican, and Republicans were less likely to send in absentee ballots. That means for every 70...
That is Tim Pool, and he introduces... We could go on and on for that. His 15 minutes is magnificent, but we want to bring the guy in himself, Matt Braynard. Matt actually set up and ran the data operation. That was one of the central keys to the Trump 2016 victory. This is a guy that understands systems, he understands data, and most importantly, he knows how to extract from data what exactly is going on with the data. Matt, we only got a couple minutes in this segment. We're going to bring you back for the next, but I want to tee it off first. I wanted you just to describe before we get into the details of what Tim Pool and so many others are excited about. What have you been doing post November 3rd to work through and try to help the American people understand what went on?
So I bring to the table a very deep and broad background working in voter data and election systems. You mentioned I was in charge of data and strategy at the Trump campaign in 2016, but I've worked on campaigns all over the country and for the country's premier election and administration firm, Election Data Services. So these are subjects I'm very intimate about. After the election, there was a lot of questions about anomalies that have been occurring, and I saw a lot of speculation, a lot of line graphs and charts and postulations about mathematical theories. And I thought to myself that what we really need to do is find concrete pieces of evidence that demonstrate that if something nefarious happened here, something concrete. So I designed 6 research methods that I applied across all 6 states to find real living, breathing people who are potentially victims of voter fraud, or concrete evidence of people taking actions that they shouldn't, like voting twice or voting in violation of their residencies.
And how did you staff that? How did you pull together? You had the theory of the case, and you went to the 6 states, and you knew what you want to accomplish. How did you staff it, and who did you staff it with? What were their qualifications?
Well, first, this was a very expensive process. We spent about $190,000 on data, about $400,000 on phone calls through call centers. And what I did was I pulled back together my same team from 2016, the Trump campaign, who have a very good understanding of the subject matter. We set up a headquarters. We expanded our internal call center. So I went back to the same people that helped, that I knew I could count on for before to build the core parts of my team, along with many of the same vendors. In fact, all of the vendors that the campaign had used in the past, both for data and for call centers. And thankfully, we crowdfunded and we were able to raise the amount of money we needed to pay for this very quickly.
Discovered that he thinks it now ought to be part of a formal investigation.
Right. So again, I think that what separates our project from everything else out there that is questioning this election is that we are coming forward with concrete examples. There's no speculation. There's no mathematical theories or scatter plots here. We have reached out to voters across the country in these in these 6 states, trying to find people who disagree with the state's record of what actually happened. So we found people who are telling us that they did not cast a ballot, even though the state has marked a ballot for them. People who are telling us that they did not request an absentee ballot, even though the state says they sent them one. And people who say they sent back an absentee ballot, even though the state said they never received it. We're also finding people that have voted multiple times in multiple states, people who have cast ballots in states that they are no longer legally eligible to do so. And, I think when people think of voter fraud, there's a real, a perception of there being some really dark cloak and dagger stuff, and maybe that does take place, but most of the time that leaves indicators that can be uncovered through a proper investigation. That's what we've done here. So we find in cases that either there's a tremendous amount of clerical error, there's some kind of organized effort to do this, or there's a lot of self-initiated voter fraud, like somebody who lives in New York, but they got an absentee ballot from Georgia, and decide to cast it in Georgia. We found cases like this where people are shopping around where they want to vote, even if they don't meet the residency requirements. And in many cases, we've put together substantial numbers of these people that we've documented, and at least in Georgia, far more than the margin of victory in that state.
But that's the question. And by the way, I want to bifurcate this. How much do you think it's just election administration, and how much do you actually think it is acts of commission of willful voter fraud?
Well, the problem is the election system in this country is so broken that it creates a space for this to happen, and it creates a tremendous space for people to suspect it of happening because it's very hard to disprove. Now, I don't have any evidence of it being organized. I don't have any evidence to determine it either way, so I'd only have to speculate, and I've tried to stay away from speculating. I've just come up with people who say that they did not vote, and the state said they voted. I've come up with concrete examples of people who do not have, through multiple indicators, are not eligible to cast votes in these 6 states. So, it's really up to people who are proper investigators, or the court system or the legislatures to better investigate, like, how does this happen? How does a kid who's an Olympic wrestler who has not voted in a long time in Arizona have a ballot cast in his name? That we had somebody come forward very publicly who all they got from us was a voice message saying, hey, we believe a ballot was cast in your name and you may not have cast it. And we're collecting these stories all over the country and turning them into declarations and affidavits for courtrooms. And in almost all of these cases, we have audio recordings of the phone calls of people telling us, no, I did not cast that ballot.
So that is what Matt Poole is so excited about, that you've actually gone in what we call here in the war room, you have the receipts. You actually went and you use this call center you set up to actually contact people, willingly recorded them, and they actually came clean with that they didn't vote. Somehow it's been done in their name, correct?
That's correct. So I've got all of their, we have their names, their addresses, etc. And this is entirely concrete. So when I put out a number, I mean, that's a real number. That's a real person who acknowledged something through one of our surveys, or whom we can literally hold up. This is South Carolina's voter registration, and this is Georgia's, and you can see these are clearly the same person on a very tight and exact match. So again, there's no speculation. And when I started, I was really aiming to create what I would consider to be stuff that's actionable, because I don't think theories are necessarily actionable, but this stuff, I mean, it's as concrete as it gets.
I want to make sure for the audience, one of the things we try to do is to do kind of constructs, intellectual constructs, so you can start to about how to think things and get mental maps. In this process, we have a retail and we have a wholesale. Rooting a lot of the lawsuits and a lot of what you hear with Sidney Powell, that's more the wholesale. That's more the going after the category of illegal ballots and the whole mail-in ballot and all those issues. Matt, in the granularity side of it, are getting down to the details of the retail, of actually what happened, and tie it back to either people or people that have died or whatever. Matt, the question gets to be on the methodology you're pursuing and going down, whereas Brother Tim Poole gets excited, and yes, you're clearly showing the hard evidence of voter fraud. At the end of the day, does this get enough? And I realize Wisconsin and Georgia and Nevada are different than Michigan and Pennsylvania. But do you see right now where, besides the fact that, yes, there was voter fraud and it'll be tied back to something, that your retail efforts, do you think there actually is going to be enough there at the end of the day that either you can't certify these states or actually could flip them?
Well, right now it's a matter for the lawyers, and I've been busy all day filling out declarations and reviewing exhibits that I think have already been filed as of the 5 o'clock deadline today in a couple of different states. And I know there are a couple other states, because like all this research is going into courtrooms. And I do know that some people have been bringing it to try to lobby legislators. So it's having an effect that way. I have no idea whether it will actually have an impact, but I hope that it motivates people to look a lot more carefully at this election, and not only this election, but to moving forward, bring about the kinds of reforms that are necessary to prevent this kind of thing from happening. On Monday, I intend to release my full report and all of my conclusions, along with making recommendations. And one of the recommendations I'm going to absolutely have to make is, with these voting machines, whether, I'm not an expert in the software, and I can't make any claims about vote switching or, how data was transferred. But one thing I'm certain of is that all of these systems are closed. And in any kind of democracy, it is absolutely imperative that any of our electronic counting machines be open sourced. And I think that's an issue that Democrats and Republicans can probably agree on, is that the software and the hardware have absolutely got to be open source, so there's no doubt about how it works. There's no black box that's somehow impenetrable to public scrutiny or to regulatory oversight. And that's definitely a change that I think needs to happen, not just to prevent potential voter fraud, but to eliminate the suspicion of it, because I'll tell you that as bad as an illegitimately elected government is, the widely held suspicion of an illegitimately elected government is just about as dangerous and is absolutely toxic to a democracy. Look, I know that Barack Obama won the election in 2012. I didn't like it. It made me sick to my stomach when it happened, but I know he won it. And I think that when people know that they got beat, then they can sort of focus on the party or the way you organize and how to better, register people and turn them out to vote and focus on that. The problem is when the suspicion is that it doesn't matter if it's just going to be stolen anyway, it's incredibly demoralizing. Again, it's very toxic to a democracy. So, I mean, when I started this, I didn't know what my conclusions were going to be. I didn't have any preconceived notions of what I would find. Now I have found things. I'm starting to, finally go through the final process of digesting them and trying to draw some conclusions. And I'll release those Monday. But I think what people, when I started this project, what they really wanted was just to know the truth. They weren't saying, go get that evidence, go flip these states, go win the election. They just wanted to really know the truth, because not knowing that is very dangerous to a democracy.
Did the Trump campaign, did you reach out to them for resources instead of having the deplorables put up the money? Did you reach out to the Trump campaign, or you thought it was just better not to take campaign money so you could have independence and not take guidance from everybody? We're going to do it the way we're going to do it, and the results are going to be the way we're just going to put the results up.
Well, when the way this started was I didn't intend to do this. I wrote an outline of these methods that could be applied, and I sent them to all of the important people, many people I'm sure you and I both know, and it didn't go anywhere. So what I did was, at the time, I had like less than 200 followers on Twitter, and I just tweeted it. Within 24 hours, a GoFundMe had been set up, and we had raised $220,000. GoFundMe nuked that. They deleted it and refunded everybody their money. So we created another crowdfunding site on GiveSendGo, and that got almost $650,000 raised. And then I told people, please stop sending money, because that's really I need to pay for this project, and I didn't want to have any really left over if I could avoid it. So that's how it started. And I've been in contact with all of the lawyers for the campaign in the different states, and different lawyers running parallel operations. And in some cases, it's not completely clear, but if this evidence is useful that I've created, or my testimony can be helpful, I've certainly done everything to make myself available. And so far, I've signed quite a few declarations and exhibits that are being filed in courtrooms across the country.
We look forward to having you back, Matt, about your full report. You got about 30 seconds. Has the Biden campaign reached out and tried to be of assistance? And your comment earlier about illegitimacy and illegal nature, do you believe it would behoove the Biden campaign to get actively involved here so that people could see that this election was done with only legal votes? And we got about 30 seconds.
I think it would be in their interest to do so, absolutely, because they don't want to have hanging over their heads the specter of illegitimacy. However, I sometimes wonder if they think that maybe they want to encourage that, because in other countries, whereas there's that specter of illegitimacy and the inability to do anything about it, it really demoralizes your political opponents and might just convince people who supported Trump that they just shouldn't bother voting again, which I think would be a win for them. So in this way, the suspicion of it kind of helps them.